Welcome to Lot Talk, powered by Lotpop Inc., where WTF takes the suck out of your variable operations. I'm Chris Keene, one of your co-hosts, and joining me each and every single week will be my partners in WTF, Mr. Ronaldo Leonard and Mr. John Anderson. Gentlemen, let's kick off the party. Subject number one, episode number one, no more shooting fish in the barrel. What do we think, guys?
Well, first of all, morning, fellas. How we doing this morning? Good? Bringing the energy, ready to go?
Locked, cocked, and ready to rock, baby.
All right, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Chris, you started it off. No more shooting fish in a barrel. Give us a little synopsis there of what you're pointing to.
Well, let me tell you, John, Ronaldo, the rest of the world out there, our brothers and sisters in the automotive industry, it's a challenge. And here's what the challenge is. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've had wonderful customers coming into our dealerships. We've been able to look at them and say, hey, it's okay if you say no to this car because I got 15 people over there waiting for you to say no. And in our industry, we've been able to sit there and do that for the last 4 or 5 years. There's been no art. There's been no work. We've just been sitting at the restaurant taking orders and passing out free ride coupons. But now, John, Ronaldo, I don't think either one of y'all could disagree. Those days are long gone now, and we got to get to work again.
No, yeah, Chris, you're spot on. I think, listen, I think first off, we jumped right into it, and that's great. But, I would like to take a little bit of time for those that don't know of us and don't know of Lotpop out there to give a little background about who we are and what we do. So, just in relation to what you're talking about, Chris, that's something that, our team at Lotpop looks at on a daily basis for hundreds of dealers across the country. So when, Chris, you're referring to that, we see that data and we work with dealers on that subject. So, that's something we do on a daily basis with our data platform, our software, and then our team of PEs that consult with dealers all over the country. So, I think you're spot on with that. And I think one of the things that sometimes I feel like dealers aren't realizing is, our industry since 2008, 2009 has been trending up, most part year after year, right? And since that time, we've hired a lot of new folks. There's been a shift in dealership, at least variable operations, right? We've made a shift at a lot of stores. We brought in younger employees, which is excellent. I think in a lot of ways that's been very positive for our industry. But at the same time, if you've got younger employees on your floor, they've never seen a business like this that we're having right now, right? And so at some of the events we've been to, whether it's been NADA, Digital Dealer, Used Car Week, you hear a lot of dealer principals, a lot of general managers saying, hey, man, I need to get my guys back to the basics, right? And the question is do they know what the basics are, right? Because it hasn't, I'm not gonna pretend it's been all roses, but really for the last 10 to 12 years, the automotive industry has been pretty good up until the beginning of this year, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, John. But when I look back over the last, let's just give it 7 years, our industry has continuously leaned towards efficiency with technology, apps, AI. And it's so contradictory to what consumers have always told us that they wanted. It was a personal experience, a connection with a salesperson. When I first started in the business in '99, I was told if you make a friend, you make a sale. And then we've kind of moved away from that, over the years. But that's kind of taken us to the point where we are now, where we don't have salespeople who've been trained on the process to walk a prospect down the road to a sale. And those fine little tools and tricks that we learned early on in the car business have kind of fallen away because it hadn't been documented and it's not being passed on to that new generation of salespeople that are coming into the dealership now, to the point that you mentioned a minute ago, John. So I agree. Yeah, it's no longer like shooting fish in a barrel, but it can be if we turn our focus back to what made the auto industry such a great place to work, and that we've all, found a home in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you guys bring us some valid points, and
let me ask you.
Go ahead, John.
No, go, Chris. Go, brother.
No, I was going to say, you guys are just bringing some fantastic points there. John, you talk about that younger generation coming in. Let's reframe that a little bit. It's not the younger generation, it's the next generation. And Ronaldo, what you're talking about, it hasn't been documented, it hasn't been passed on. Well, us veterans, that have been around in this business for 30 plus years, we're going to be extinct at some point in time. And if we don't start passing it on now, what's going to happen to our industry that we love so much? John, you talked about at the beginning of this, why are we doing this? Who are we? Well, this is exactly why we're doing it. This is 1,000,000% why we're doing it, so we can pass that on to the next generation, so we can take those things that have created success. We talk about history repeating itself. Hey, high-waisted jeans and mullets, they're back, okay? Who's to say that we can't do it?
Lord have mercy.
Come on now.
You may see more mullets down south than we do up here.
You forgot platform shoes, Chris. You forgot platform shoes, brother. Well,
that's only because I'm 5'11". I have to wear them to be 5'11". Okay, so it's been a normal for me for a long time. But in all seriousness, guys, we've got to take and we've got to pass that on, and that's the whole nature, the reason why. When we sat together at the Lotpop HQ in Olathe, Kansas, when we sat together and we talked about what's another thing on top of our university that we do every quarter? What's another thing that we could give back to our industry? And that's the whole reason for Lot Talk, being able to give back some of that old timer knowledge, as you talked about, Ronaldo, passing that on. John, as you talked about that younger generation that we should call the next generation of our industry. That's what we're here for, folks. For those listening in, for those watching this podcast right now, here's what I encourage. Send us a note. Go to lotwalk.com. Send us a note and say, hey, here's some more information that we want to share. Hey, I'd love to be on your show. Yeah, trust me, we'll bring you in. Because we're going to have a bunch of great topics like no more shooting fish in the barrel. Let's unpack that for a minute, guys. Let's really unpack it. I alluded to it at the beginning. We can't sit there anymore and just look at a customer and take an order. We actually have to put some art and some professionalism back into our industry because we're not taking orders anymore. I sat there just yesterday. I was reading a really, really, really good article from our partners over at Cox Automotive. And it was an article written by Mark Schreimer. Cox Automotive's car buyer journey study shows satisfaction with car buying improved in 2023 after 2 years of decline. Now, this is an article that was written at the beginning of this year. Now, the piece that stood out to me the most, guys, and I want to get your feedback on this. We talked about the digital tools, Ronaldo, as you just alluded to. And here in this article, it talks about it. It says, with better digital tools, the buying process becomes more efficient. When it comes to car buying in America, the desired state is omni-channel, not entirely digital. According to the latest survey, now hear me close on this, guys, 50% of all car buyers completed 100% of their steps in person, while 43% completed steps in a mix of online and in person, only giving 7% of car buyers in 2023 completing all the steps online. How's that resonate with y'all?
Well, when I was, I didn't mean to step on your words, but one of the things I was going to ask you guys is, with the dealers that you speak with on a weekly basis, how many of those dealers do you guys feel like understand the dealerships or the platforms that they're truly operating? So let's say you have a single point dealer, right? Does that crew, that staff at that store, does that management staff at that store, do they truly believe that they're just operating that bricks and mortar operation, or do they think about the other dealership that they're operating, which is their digital dealership? How often do you think guys think about that throughout their daily work plan or their week?
Boy, I would say that the true operational mindset where you have a brick and mortar and you're also operating a digital dealership, probably 65% of the dealers truly understand that. But I think they get the context of it mixed up. The facts that you read to us a minute ago, Chris, kind of validate that. 80% of people who are searching for a vehicle, they're going to start their search online. But what was it? 100% finish the steps in person. And so that digital dealership is an extension of what you're doing, but because it's tangible and because you live in it day in and day out, I think that brick and mortar situation is what they're most focused on and what they key on most. A lot of people, I think, it just kind of missed that transition point where the consumer goes from searching online for information, but then deciding what they're going to buy and who they're going to buy it from, and that being an interpersonal relationship.
No, and listen, Ronaldo, I agree with what you're saying, and I get it. The reason why I asked that question right after Chris went through that data is, listen, enormous amount of your customers ultimately end up wanting to do business with you in person. That's how they want to transact. Well, the percentages, right, Chris, that worked out to be about 93% of your customers, right? When you add those percentages together, right, want to do business in person, right? So, but here was my point about the bricks and mortar and the digital side, right? The digital dealership, right? A lot of times we see, right, you guys would agree, we see that dealers take a different mindset towards their bricks and mortar, right? And I get it, right? Because it's right in front of you, right? Listen, if I'm a sales manager in an average store, how many hats am I wearing, right? I've got 15 different hats, right? I'm submitting deals. I'm appraising trades. Maybe I've got a salesperson that's having a bad day, so I'm doing a one-on-one. I might have some service heat, right? I'm bouncing all over the store, and I'm, and we talk about attention spans, right? If you're working on something and you break that attention and then you come back to it, how long does it take you to get back in a role, right? So that's just a common thing with a manager at a dealership, right? They're wearing multiple hats, right? But the thing that we challenge, right, is whatever we would do in our bricks and mortar operation, right, we should be doing in our digital store. So, Chris, to your point, what do we see a lot of times, right? We ask dealers all the time, how long would it be before you lost your temper, or we like to say threw a chair through the window, if you had a customer on your lot and none of your sales team went out and waited on that customer, right? And we hear what? It'd take 30 seconds to a minute, right? But yet we see all the time that customers that are literally standing on our digital dealership, right? It's been 20, 30, 40 days. They raised their hand on a car that we still have in stock on our lot. And it's been 20, 30, 40 days since we've had communication with that customer. And think about that in today's market, right? With the economy, and with the higher price of cars, and we read all the time how people are customers, right, are holding back. They're observing, right, and then you throw in the data that the average customer sends out 12 to 15 leads when they go to shop for a car. So you pull that together, and Chris, with what you're talking about, listen, we've got to communicate with those folks standing on our digital dealership the same way we would on our bricks and mortar, so they can get to our bricks and mortar. You just brought up the data that they want to do business in person, right? But we've got to get them there, right? So I think that's a huge issue that I'm seeing out there right now nationwide, man. Is just we've lost I think the training. We talk about first 30 a lot in what we do, right? That first 30, that's very important to our company, right? But how about how important it is to communicate with our customers and because listen, if we're not doing it, somebody's going to, right?
Absolutely. So let me ask y'all this: how many leads do you think the average dealership gets in a month?
Well, I could cheat on that, but I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So let's just use a number that we see pretty often. Brand new dealers that come to us for additional services here at Lotpop Inc. and use our LotWalk platform. 350. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. I would say around 300, 350. Yeah.
Okay. So if we have 350 of them, and the data we see all the time is 75%, 70 to 80. So we'll split the difference at 75% of the activity that our salespeople in the dealerships are doing aren't even on anything to sell a car, right?
That's what the data shows. Yes, sir.
Okay. So if I take that same 350 and we're not taking care of 75% of them, that's 263 of them. And if we go ultra conservative, I'm talking ultra conservative, that same 263 at $35 a lead, that's $9,187 that we're spending and wasting because we're not meeting the customers where they're at.
No, that's true. I mean, I
was on a call this morning, John, and we were talking about the first 30. We were talking about how we could yield the most profit in a car dealership on inventory that's 0 to 30 days old. And we do all this work as a used car manager to position this inventory to go out in the first 30, to get that activity in the first 30. But if we don't take care of the customer when they land on our various channels, and if we don't meet the customer where they're at, because we're still in the mindset of being able to look at a customer and say, hey, if you don't buy it, it's okay. There's 15 people over there waiting for you to say no.
Not anymore.
Nope.
Isn't that the problem?
Yeah. Talk about when you allude to taking care of a customer, right? Because that's kind of a general, right? That's a broad, right? Taking care of a customer. And really, I'm more pointing to, right? I would assume that when a customer shows up in your bricks and mortar lot, that's when dealerships excel, right? That they know how to take care of customers, right? So that from that point, Ronaldo cringed a little bit. I get it, brother. I get it. But for this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the thing that's so frustrating is because, we know what our vision of taking care of customers is. And when I have, previous customers of mine that, have become some of my best friends that I stay in contact with, or just my neighbors come to me and ask me, hey, Ronaldo, when you sold cars, did you ever just pitch keys to somebody the first time you met them to test drive a vehicle? We're just wondering if that is normal. And I'm like, or if
Yeah,
you look into, or if you look into a dealer CRM and see that the first 13 contacts to a prospect are automated emails from 7 different people in the dealership, and not one attempt from a salesperson who's trained and his livelihood relies on taking care of that customer and walking them through the process. So yeah, that's why I smirk and I giggle, but I mean, no offense. Didn't mean to interrupt.
no, you're fine. Hey, listen, it's all great stuff, right?
Yeah.
But look, we all looked at it yesterday, right? We had this discussion. We were talking about, one of the things that we do as a company, right, is we have access to dealerships, inventory management tool and their CRMs, right? So we're able to kind of pick up the hood and look under the hood, right? And so I was talking with you guys yesterday about a dealer that I was working with yesterday, and we lifted up the hood in their CRM, right? And we started looking at the quality of conversations that their salespeople were having with customers, right? And what was the one thing we kept seeing, right? The customer would ask a direct question initially, and the question never got answered, right? So, Chris, what I was alluding to in Ronaldo, right? When you talk about taking care of your customers, right? What does that look like when you're dealing with people that have sent you a lead and haven't been to your dealership yet, right? Maybe they're a customer that has never even visited your dealership one time. So they know nothing about you other than the fact that you've got a car that they're interested. They raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in this car. How do we take care of that customer?
Gosh, that's a great question. I always get back to, and I was in a unique situation when I got in. I got surrounded by some guys who knew the business, who knew how to work with customers. But I was just always told to use 2 ears. You got 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth. You should listen twice as much as you talk, but asking high quality questions. If the hand raiser says, yeah, I'm interested in that vehicle. Yeah, you'd want to introduce yourself and thank them for the opportunity to earn the business, but then follow up with a question that, why are you interested in this particular vehicle? What is it that attracts it to you? What are you going to be using it for? It's something to engage them in a conversation to let them know that, you valued the opportunity to earn their business, and the dealership values their business. Setting that stage, I think, opens the door for them to come down to the dealership where you can really continue that process and build that type of rapport and relationship. But AI generated messages, I think, fail to do that. Automated emails and text fails to do that. The first thing they want to know is, what's the old phrase? Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And
100%.
Sending out that lead is basically just a cry for help. I need to meet somebody who can help me through this process and fill in the dots.
Yeah, I think another part to that is, even beyond that cry for help, filling in the blank spaces, we also have to be, for our dealer partners out there and for the folks that just across the automotive industry. There are so many resources and tools that these dealers have their fingertips on now. All the digital retailing pieces, all the marketing pieces, all the different ways that they're able to cascade their vehicles themselves, their dealerships, out to the consumer public. And I've said it a few times already, of being able to meet the customer where they're at. We looked at it yesterday, that very specific example, John, that you were talking about, when the customer asked 5 different times about, hey, the price, is this your best price? And they never answered the customer. Well, it's almost a trick bag. It's almost a trick bag that they get into, because we provide all these tools and these resources for our sellers out there in the market today, for our managers, for our GMs, for the dealership as a whole. But that we don't end up using them properly. And these consumers have that capability to leverage more information, to gather more information, And we simply just dismiss the fact that that consumer public has more power and leverage than they've ever had before. It's no longer a magazine. It's no longer an article or an ad in the newspaper, a liner ad. It's no longer one of those. If you don't give them what they want, they'll bounce from you that quick, and then they just get on the interweb and start bouncing around again, jump back on the up bus, and ride it down to the next dealership. I think that's probably one of our bigger challenges there, John.
No, I would agree. You know, if you think about that, you know, if you think about what I mentioned earlier, the average customer sends, 12 to 15 leads out to dealerships, right? Why are they doing that? Why, why are they sending so many? That I'm just going to be honest with you guys. That data kind of surprised me that it was that many, right? But, Chris, you mentioned all the tools that we have available to us, right? And, I think in specifically today, right, where the challenges are obvious. I mean, I'm not talking about anything that everyone doesn't see, right? And we don't hear on a weekly basis or a daily basis from our dealer partners, right? That it's challenging, right? And so, you have people out there. We have an election around the corner. We have things going on in our country that have people nervous, right? Everything is more expensive, right? And again, I'm not trying to be, Debbie Downer here. It's just the facts of the, here you go, work the facts, right? It's the facts of what's going on out there. And so people are hesitant. So, when people are hesitant, what are they looking for out of their salesperson when they reach out and are interested in a vehicle, right? They want confirmation or confidence that they're making a good decision. I'm interested in this vehicle. Give me the reasons why I should buy it, right? And so that's the thing that I think, I'm glad we ended up going down this road on this podcast, because I seriously, Chris, you brought up First 30 earlier, and I know that's a big thing for our company. That's our big push, right? Sell 65% of your inventory out of that first 30 days, where I think any dealer watching this would agree that that's where your biggest return on investment would be, right? As your inventory ages, the investment goes down, right? So that is extremely important. But how do we get to that point, right? And so my point is, and listen, Chris, and Ronaldo, if you'll bear with me here, I just want to read a few percentages, and this is, we found this yesterday, and the data comes from multiple sources. You got Limelight, Dealix, Cox Automotive, the Dealer Marketing Magazine. So there's several sources here, but when you look at some of these stats, for instance, 54% of car buyers would pay more for a better buying experience. And when they talk about buying experience, they're talking about online, over the phone, and then at the dealership. Well, it starts online, right? So I've got to have consistent communication with my customers, right? And so I get it. We hear salespeople all the time say, "Hey, listen, you want me to talk to my customers every 2 to 3 days? What do those conversations look like, right? I can't continue to ask my customer, hey, you want to buy a car?" I get it, right? But what do customers spend, 14 to 16 hours online doing, right? What are they doing? They're researching, right? So when you look at some of these percentages, or when I read off some of this data, that was one. Listen to this one. Up to 72% of dealership salespeople never ask the caller for an appointment. Chris, you talked about the money that we're spending on leads, and then think about the time that's invested to get that inventory, right? We either trade for it, or we've purchased it. All the time invested in getting that inventory, right? And so now we have that inventory out there. We've done everything to get it online. Think about the dollars we spend to put it out there on multiple sources, right? And then we get a customer that reaches out to us, says, "Hey, I'm interested," and 72% of salespeople or BDC never ask for an appointment, right? 25%
or John,
25% of mishandled calls are converted to sales. They asked what? I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say you talked about the 72% of the dealership agents don't ask, the caller for an appointment. Okay. But also a challenge, they ask for the appointment too soon because they haven't met the customer's needs yet.
Yeah.
And now it's just
okay. I get it.
A game comes in.
Well, listen, I think what we've talked about today in this topic is I think we could spend enormous amounts of time on this because I feel like what we've talked about today, we just scratched the surface. There's so much more there. When you look at some of this data, 95% of car shoppers rely on online resources to gather information by bypassing dealerships at their starting point. Right? Think about that for a second, right? So, if they're using third party to gather resources, right? How could we build value as a salesperson with our potential customer, right? By providing those resources, right? That would be a whole nother context to talk to that customer by giving them resources that they're out there doing research on. Listen, I don't know about you guys. I know I'm fairly busy, right? If I'm looking for a car and a salesperson does the research for me and sends me that and saves me that time, guess what? They've just built a ton of value with me, right?
Absolutely. And that, unfortunately, is just something that we've gotten away from when we had that period where, we're taking orders and those skills that you kind of build a foundation under just kind of fall away. So, all of the resources that consumers have and that they use, once we get to the point where salespeople and sales management use those same, opportunities to gather that information and increase value in themselves and the dealership, that's when we start to win again. But we start to win with a foundation moving forward that's going to build on that experiential factor that people are willing to pay more for, but will also build a following. We talk about experience. I always think about this story about one of my old friends. He says that Tom Bodette and Motel 6 and the folks that run Ritz-Carlton, they provide the same service, but they're on opposite ends of the spectrum as far as, the price point. And what's the difference? It's just the experience that you get when you go there, right?
Right. Hey, Ronaldo, you bring up a good point. And I guess that's kind of how I would, like to circle to right now with us is, we spent a significant amount of time talking about, what we see out there and some of the issues that we see in this area, right? Which I think is very important. Like I said, I think we could talk I know the three of us could probably talk for 6 or 7 hours on this topic. So, but we would lose everybody, right? So, let's, and Ronaldo, you just alluded to some of it, what are some of the solutions? What are some of the things that dealers can do that would start to create a difference in their stores, so that one, their customers are being taken care of in a manner that their customers deserve and want, right? Yeah. And then two, I turn that customer standing on my online or digital dealership into a customer that's standing on my bricks and mortar dealership. Because we know with all the research customers do nowadays, when they come to your store, they're coming to buy, right? They don't have to come to your store, right? They've got plenty of resources that they can. So when they make a move towards your store, they show up there, they're there to buy. And that's even another point that we could discuss on another podcast is, what do we do with them when they get there, right? Because how many times does that ball get dropped, right? But for this conversation, what are some of the things that we can do as dealers to really help with what we've been talking about today, right? Where we feel like that the ball's being dropped out there just based on how the industry has evolved in the last year.
Yeah. Probably the biggest tip that I would give them is, first of all, take off your dealer hat. Look at your business from a customer's point of view.
Good stuff.
All the places, yeah, and we're all consumers. We all shop and do our own things. But what is it during those experiences that we go through in our daily lives that we find value added in businesses that we do business with, and incorporate that into what you're doing there at your dealership? That's probably the biggest step. Take that dealer hat off and look at it from the people that you're trying to serve, or the people that you are trying to attract into your business.
Mm-hmm.
Good point, Ronaldo.
Yeah, you can gain a lot of insight and mystery shoppers. I used to do that quite a bit at my dealership. I'd reach out to my friends who I knew that weren't in the business, but hey, do me a favor. Come into the dealership and let me know what you find out. Let me know what you see. How is my place of business attractive to you if you were in the market for a vehicle? Tell me where I fall short and tell me where I shine.
Chris, what about you? What would you say to a dealer that something that they could apply that would make a difference in that area we've been talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a stating rule inside of our dealerships: no customer leaves the lot without a manager TO. We exponentially get more ups in our digital dealership than we do our brick and mortar. If I were back at a dealership today, for those listening, for those watching, whether you're a salesperson, BDC rep, manager, leadership of a dealership, I would revisit your TO policy to your online dealership. And is it equally the same as your brick and mortar TO policy? Because if we're not auditing, if we're not looking at the quality of our follow-up, how are we ever going to sell 65 to 75% of our inventory in the first 30? When we got the customers coming in, but we ain't taking care of them. And that first step is to see what we're doing online, how we're doing it, and make sure the leadership of your dealerships are involved in that very, very quickly. That's what I would give.
No, that's good stuff. Good stuff. I guess I would add to those great points. I guess I would add the Amazon theory, right? You've all shopped on Amazon. When you're looking at something, what else do you see? Right? You see
all the suggestions.
You see options, right? They just throw all kinds of options of other stuff that you could be interested in, right? And one of the statistics that was quoted by porchgroupmedia.com that I read yesterday was 40% of car shoppers discover new vehicles they weren't previously considering thanks to video marketing, right? And so, when what consumer out there doesn't like choices, right? Why are Brazilian steakhouses so popular? Right? You get lots of choices, right? So I think one of the things that I would recommend is listen when you're, salespeople out there, BDC reps out there, right? When you're talking about what conversations can I have with my potential customers, right? That changes so that I'm not always asking them to buy the car that they raised their hand on. How about every 2 or 3 days, send them a video, walk around another car in inventory that is potentially similar in segment and price point. Now, I'm gonna brag on our company. We serve that up to our dealer partners, so we make it easy, right? But that would be a way that you can serve your customers in a fantastic way, right? Is just giving them options. Everybody likes options, right? And so that's another way for me to keep myself in front of my customers. So that would be my 2 cents to this.
Yeah, 100%. And with our topic today, folks, Thanks to all the great knowledge from Mr. John Anderson, Mr. Ronaldo Leonard, that's just the start of it. This is episode 1. Many more episodes to come. No more shooting fish in a barrel. How can we fix that? Audit your online experience. Involvement. Meeting the customers where they're at. Is everything mirroring the digital experience just like we would do in the brick and mortar? That's the basis of what we've talked about today. So most importantly, thank you, John Anderson. Thank you, Ronaldo Leonard. But even more important to that, thank you, folks, for listening in. Thank you for joining us on this podcast if you're visually watching. And as always, both physically and digitally, do a lot walk before your customer jumps on your competitor's up bus. And if you're not sure how to do that, click the link below or go to lotwalk.com. and we'll gladly spend time with you and help you do that lot walk. And we'll see you next week on episode number 2 of Lot Talk, powered by Lotpop.
Great stuff,
Take
guys.
care, folks.
Yes, take care.